Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Starting in April of last year, the horrific images of corpses littering the streets of Bucha surfaced and really made the entire world realize that Putin's goal was not just territorial conquest in Ukraine, but the brutal repression of the Ukrainian people. And the nightmare that began in Bucha continues to this day in Ukraine. And that's why this hearing is so important. The Ukrainian people deserve justice. And I want to thank you, Madam Ambassador, for your efforts to help get the Ukrainian people that justice. And even though we are talking about a lot of the legal and jurisdictional aspects of how to bring Putin and his cronies to justice, I want to make clear that in the short term, the biggest single thing we can do to make sure Ukraine and the Ukrainian people get justice is to make sure that Ukraine wins and Putin loses. That has to happen. And that's where, if you just think about what the Biden administration has been doing, it's been slow to respond to the requests for Ukraine with regard to the types of weapons they need, whether it's the advanced HIMARS rockets, the Patriot missile systems, Abrams tanks, and now F-16 training. It seems like they're always a step behind, almost as if they're trying to live up to Winston Churchill's axiom about Americans that will do the right thing after we've exhausted all of their possibilities. But in this case, you know, this erratic and slow behavior is costing the Ukrainians the opportunity to achieve the victory and also costing Ukrainians lives. But the question I want to get into has to do with the abduction that Senator Risch mentioned about of Ukrainian children. According to Ukrainian national databases, Russia has forcibly transferred over 19,000 Ukrainian children to its territory. However, this number is likely much higher. Some children have been taken from occupied areas where their parents were asked to sign a release form without being told that their children would be taken away and not coming back. Others, including those whose parents were killed by Russian forces, have been forcibly adopted into Russia. In February, Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab identified 32 integration camps where children are indoctrinated in Russian history, propaganda, language, and culture. These monstrous abductions are part of a general genocide, which we've talked about already, to erase Ukraine's identity by stealing their future. They have rightly been condemned as a war crime by the international community, and with the ICC issuing an arrest warrant in March for Vladimir Putin and his Children's Rights Commissioner, Maria Lvova-Belova. So, even though we've focused our information on this, or attention on this, the Ukrainian governments, NGOs, advocates have been trying to get these children back, but the number is around 400 out of the potential 19,000 or more. What more, Ambassador, can be done to assist parents? As a father of 3 children myself, this is the most heartrending thing I can think of, is having your children taken away from you, never to see them again. What else can we be doing?
Yeah, it's a horrific feature of this war. I absolutely agree with you. As a mother of 2, it's terrifying to imagine what those children are experiencing and the anguish that those parents must feel. And I know that there are multiple efforts afoot. So some of them are in the accountability space, but there's also very quiet humanitarian work being done to try and get those children back and create a list of them so we know when they were last seen, where they may have gone, trying to utilize open source investigative techniques to identify them in photographs, for example, that the Russians are trotting out of, happy Ukrainian citizens as they're now being subjected to Russification and re-education to forget their home culture. So there's much that can be done here. I was quite happy to see the ICC move forward on this as their first set of charges. It's a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, and it will be interesting to see whether there are additional charges forthcoming on the basis of that. So I share your concern, and I think this is something we should be working across government to rectify.
Is there enough legal support for these families to be able to help recover their children?
There are. I've been to Ukraine, and I met with the team that is focused on the families, the survivors, and they are working very hard to get them the resources they need in order to try and find where those children are and do what they can to get them back. Many times it requires parents traveling to Russia to actually physically bring their children back, and they are doing that, which is remarkable.
What about targeting the perpetrators of this, for war crimes, prosecution, all that? Are we doing enough there to be able to target the people who are facilitating this?
Well, what is remarkable about this particular crime is that the 2 key defendants now have essentially admitted to it, and have bragged about it, and have, praised each other for what they claim to be doing on a humanitarian basis, when we in fact know there's no humanitarian grounds to be doing this, especially when it is Russia itself that is creating the dire circumstances that put those children at risk in the first place. So the Yale study that you mentioned, which is funded by the State Department, they are looking through a whole series of open source information, including many of these photographs, and trying to use facial recognition software, for example, to identify individuals who may be future defendants in cases under war crimes and crimes against humanity for this crime base.
Mr. Chairman, may I just add one more question? Thank you. So also, last week, I think the Ukrainian government was talking about Belarus's complicity in removing about 2,000 Ukrainian children. What is the State Department doing with regard to Belarus and them going along with this horrible crime?
Yes, Belarus, there's no question, is quite complicit in Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. And I think it's important to focus, when we think about this aggression tribunal, that Belarus and Belarusian individuals could also be subjected to prosecution under this tribunal. We tend to focus on Russia, but to the extent that they are complicit, and one of the grounds of committing the crime of aggression is allowing your territory to be used to launch acts of aggression against a third state. And so Belarus is very much implicated in this set of crimes.